Okay, so it is my total delight to welcome Sarah Kay, Director and Global Client Leader of International Architecture Studio Woods Bagot. Sarah, welcome to Digital Dialogue, Western Sydney Unfiltered.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm feeling very honoured.
Well, I have been so excited about this conversation and I am busting to jump right into my questions. So should we get to it?
Yes.
Let's do it. Okay. So Where Do We Work From Here reached a potential audience of millions and was discussed on the BBC in their segment on how we will return to the office during and in the wake of COVID-19. Can you summarise it for us?
Absolutely. And I must thank Western Sydney Dialogue for introducing me to the 3 R's that really was some of the basis for it. So recovery, reform, and then re-engagement. And I think what we found as workplace designers, everybody was talking about recovery. How do we deal with germs and getting back into the office whilst in COVID mode? And what we really wanted to look at was re-engagement. What will the new normal look like when we come back to the office post-COVID, and what can we take away from these experiences to make working life better than it ever was before? So actually it's sort of a positive shift. And really, I mean, the outcome is quite simple, that we will always live in a combination now of a place where you want to do focused solo work and a place where you want to do collaboration, culture, socialization, those sorts of things. So we were really just experimenting with what those combinations might be. And we came up with 4 models. And I think because we actually drew the 4 models, that's what sort of got us in front of a potential audience of 22 million. It went good viral, I call it. Because actually
it's a triggering word, Sarah.
It gave people something to look at and actually see. And it was an answer. Everyone was searching for answers. And I think that's what's attractive about it. But the 4 models in sort of very simple forms. The first one was the office as culture club. So actually the office is all about creating corporate culture, a place for socialization, a place for collaboration. So the only time you would go there is for those things: collaboration, cultural events or social events. Anything else you would do from somewhere else. The second model, which is probably more relevant in recovery mode, so sort of the mode that we're in at the moment, was called in and out. So actually de-densifying the office by only having some people in at any given point in time. So kind of week A, week B, which I think a lot of organizations have employed, and probably employed with probably not that great a success. The third model was called collectives. So actually, maybe the answer is to take a big group of people and chunk it down into smaller teams and keep those teams quite isolated and separate from the broader group. Again, not ideal because you're actually not getting the full benefit from an office environment. And the fourth model, which was called community nodes, was really about decentralizing HQ. So rather than actually everybody having to come into a CBD headquarters, there might be regional nodes that are closest to people's homes that can serve as a workplace. And then you would come into the CBD for specific meetings. So it's actually probably more inter-company, so interactions between different companies that occur in the CBD, whereas your collaboration or socialization with your workmates could happen at a different place, at a node or a transport hub.
And I think that the fourth model, this community nodes model, is super exciting. I mean, you know, if we focus the attention on me for 1 minute, the idea of being able to go to a place of work and to work from home is very seductive. But I think, you know, when we look at places like Greater Western Sydney and we read about stats that, you know, generally most people that live in Greater Western Sydney have a commute time of just less than 40 minutes each way to and from work. You know, the idea that we can have a decentralized headquarters is really compelling. So I guess I'm really keen to hear about the potential impacts that a model like that could have on cities.
Yeah, and it is the most exciting option for us in terms of how it might really change the shape of the cities that we live in. And I think particularly New South Wales and Sydney, because we're sort of gearing up for it. It's something that we've been talking about for quite some time. And there's 3 or 4 reasons why the attractiveness of that idea has become sort of emphasised post-COVID. And I think one thing to remember first is the idea of working from home is actually quite exclusive. It's not really equitable to everybody within our communities. And we often forget that because the conversation's happening in a certain sort of part of the community. But there are very many people, and we find this with our global studios. Our China studios went back to work very quickly because they just cannot work from home. Their apartments are just not designed to accommodate that sort of working. You know, the younger generation who are house sharing and don't have the ability to have an office in their house, there's a lot of people that working from home just isn't an option. So providing a place to work near home, so working from near home but not quite home, is a real equalizer. It means that it's an equitable option. It means that those the idea of flexibility and choice can be applied across the whole of the community, not just for some. So the idea of these nodes is that, you know, places like, I mean, St Leonard's is my favourite example of it, but a commercial hub at St Leonard's where you can go and work in an A-grade office accommodation near where your kids are at school, near where your house is, walk in, but then catch the train into a meeting in the city if you need to. So actually you're not travelling 9 to 5, you're breaking down that rush hour traffic. You're able to just engage with the hustle and bustle of the city where you need to. And I think that feeling of safety, of being near your kids at school, near where you work, near where your safety net is quite compelling at this point in time. I think it's really attractive to people.
You bet. I think I'm really interested to also hear your view on how the pandemic has kind of just accelerated some of this thinking around these 4 models, and if you know, the model of the node, if you like, or these decentralized headquarters has kind of broken away, if you like, from the others as a result of the pandemic, or if you think that that was the way that we were just naturally headed anyway.
I think the node isn't the only solution that people will adopt. I think it's one that's particularly relevant in Sydney because it was a direction that we were heading in. And I think most of the things that we're seeing as re-engagement outcomes from COVID are accelerations of things that were happening anyway.
Yeah.
And so really seeing that as a positive thing. But I think the other big change that pushes towards this nodal idea is that we, for the first time in my working life, I lived in my community. I didn't just sleep in it. So I was actually 9 to 5 in the community that I live in. And that was a very different experience and a hugely rewarding one. And so I think people really want to hold on to that coming out of COVID as well. And that idea of you must be in the city 9 to 5 and you must be in the hustle and bustle, I think it's completely debunked. I don't think that is necessarily something that we all believe in anymore.
Yeah, well, we've certainly, I think, proved it these last few months how efficient and effective we can be through different ways of working. But I guess, you know, these thinkings are quite academic and it's one thing to model them, but, you know, having the uptake by councils and planning departments are a real game changer in realising them. In your view, do you think councils and the New South Wales planning departments are being proactive? Is there a general acceptance that, yep, this is the way of the future and we're headed there? How are you seeing the response?
I mean, well, if an example is proof, St Leonard's is an example of where the New South Wales Planning Department has just issued the 2036 plan and completely embracing this approach. So absolutely looking to prioritise grade A commercial buildings close to the existing train station, a new train station at Crow's Nest, allowing an organisation to have a 30,000 square metre headquarters building that they can occupy and send people into the city on the trains as they need to. And I think, there's been an absolute okay, now's the time, let's make it happen. And
Yeah.
we're seeing really great outcomes from the planning department.
And it feels like, I mean, in that instance, the outcomes are kind of buoyed by proximity to rail and to transport nodes. And I know that Woodsbaggett's been doing a little bit of thought leadership around Future Rail City. Can you talk to us about that?
Right. So, I mean, this was, I hate to say we were bored during lockdown. We weren't, but there was some time to reflect during lockdown. And we all got together and started to think about that idea that we were living in our neighborhoods. No one was in their cars, so kids were playing in the streets, and we were really walking more, and so chatting to neighbors and feeling connected. And I must say, my sort of sleepy suburban neighborhood felt as close to my Brooklyn neighborhood experience as I've ever sort of felt. And so we said, you know, what would happen if actually we kept 50% of these cars off the road? So we did a little bit of analysis to look at actually what the numbers would show us. And so, and this piece will be published soon. It hasn't been published yet, but we posited the question, what if we kept 50% of the cars off the road? And anybody who lived within 800 meters or 15-minute walk to a transport node didn't actually need a car. And any of those streets that were occupied by those people could become only residential traffic, so sheltered non-residential traffic. So they could become play streets or additional green space for the city. So obviously the benefits to that were pretty phenomenal, but I think they even sort of surprised us in terms of how phenomenal. So removing all of the hard surfacing and the heat island and replanting with more trees meant that just over 500,000 people would have extra people, so an additional 500,000 people in the Greater Sydney area would have access to a hectare of green space within 300 metres of where they live, so pretty amazing. It would take 126,000 cars off the road, which saves individual households an incredible amount. And then we went slightly crazy and decided to convert all of those streets into productive market gardens, feeding up to 170,000 families a year. So I mean, what you can do with that road space, not to mention sort of taking all of that road maintenance and road widening out of budgets and re-spending it somewhere else. So really promoting the need for rail and rail connections, and also showing what's possible in terms of how we set up new rail precincts and transport developments. Particularly in areas in Western Sydney where new train stations are coming. We should really push ourselves to make sure that we design those as different types of cities and different types of places.
Yeah, and it certainly sounds like, you know, this thinking around future rail cities and the way that we are now working, you know, they're not in isolation. It's almost like the amalgam of these things to create an elevated sense of place or placemaking. You know, it feels like there's a real richness there when these different typologies or the rethinking of these different typologies come together. I think, you know, in the context of Greater Western Sydney, you know, we've got Sydney Metro West coming, Parramatta Light Rail, other massive road upgrades. You know, what's your view in those projects contributing to catalysing a shift? Is it possible? Can we actually get there? Is this just a utopian dream of a future that may never arrive?
Well, I think COVID's really helped us. And I sort of always used to say, still say, I mean, the only way to make it work is to actually change the underlying psyche of the great Australian dream. And to a greater extent, the great Australian dream, it's the great New Zealand dream as well, so I can say it from both voice, is a quarter-acre section with a car and a garage with an internal door and a pretty high fence around that section. So in terms of your interaction with the street outside that fence, it's incredibly limited because you sort of get in your car without anyone seeing you. And shifting that and making people understand the value of a really fantastic medium density or high density precinct that doesn't allow you to, or doesn't require you to get in your car every time you go somewhere. I think people learned what that was like a little bit, even in suburban neighbourhoods during lockdown. I'm sure Victorians are now when they can only go 5 kilometres from their house. But I still think people have to see it to believe it. So there's a huge requirement for the property industry, for government, for local councils, for all for developers and architects to really create great places when we are developing transport hubs and precincts. Liverpool, which, you know, a little bit of a free plug for Woodsbaggett, but Liverpool paper mill that Woodsbaggett designed is a really great example of that. It's not just a residential development, it's also a place that the community is drawn into because of the quality of the F&B, because of the quality of the community engagement during the design of that project as well. And so now it's a place that people go to, experience that feeling of community, and say, wow, actually living near or in an apartment building close to the train is a really fantastic way to live.
Yeah. Sarah, on a personal note, we're kind of wrapping up the series by asking, you know, our esteemed guests kind of some lessons or some takeaways that they've learned from this period in lockdown. I know that you and I both share a bit of a love-hate relationship with F45. And given the only very recent reopening of gyms, I'm wondering how you kept fit during the lockdown, or if you ditched cardio for Netflix and a onesie.
I was incredibly well behaved, I must say. And you know, I started running a little bit as well as doing my online F45. And so early in the morning, so I was watching the sun come up every morning. And I've had this huge withdrawal since I have been back in the gym. I've really missed that. And it was through winter, it was freezing. I got chilblains on my toes, it was terrible. But I really miss it. And I think people often talk about that really powerful emotion or addiction that you get to watching the sun rise or set. And so I'm getting back into outdoor running.
Good on you. You're much more disciplined than many people I know, myself included. Sarah, thank you. Life is always good when I get to chat with you, and so most grateful for your insight as always.
Let's hope that we can re-engage in an awesome 50% less cars kind of way.
You bet. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thanks, Faye.